Hello and welcome back to the Tuesday Checklist, the weekly show that's a bit like a podcast, except it's video and turn-based. This week in the office, we've all been discussing our game of the generation so far. I don't really know why, we just have, and so we decided to film those discussions, and this is the result. Elle is up first with a choice I'm sure is surprising precisely no one.
I know you're all really trying to figure out what my game of the generation so far is. I'm sure, it's a really difficult thing for you to decide on. Yes, it's got yes, of course, it has to be. It is, for me, absolutely the best game of the generation so far. It blew me away. I think that's evident. Don't know if I've talked about it enough yet. Don't know if I've made enough videos for the channel yet, but it just, for me, was, I think, everything I could ask for in a game. So, obviously, let's start with that battle axe. I do have a bit of a predilection for battle axes. I love them, and so this one, it didn't even look that impressive to begin with. It's just a normal sized battle axe. I thought, okay, it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be fine. It's, it's Kratos wielding an axe, so how bad can it be? But it was incredible. It absolutely just was the most fun weapon I've ever used in a game. And it's so clever. I think that's the thing, is I do just want to swing a massive battle axe into someone's face. So I'll be happy with that. Does it hit people? Great. But for me, it was that this does so much more than that. So if you have watched my video on the channel, which you should have, where I talk about the Leviathan axe, it is that it isn't really an axe underneath. So it's a weapon that will let you do anything. So if you do just want to be really ranged, if you don't want to, get up close to these ogres, which is fair, they are horrific looking, you can just hang back, you can throw your axe in, you can get Atreus to shoot and just, you can just tag team out and be like, Atreus, you take that 20-foot troll, that's fine. So, on top of that, yes, there's this incredible weapon, yes, the combat is just the standout feature, but the story is absolutely beautiful. They managed to bring this character that was, very two-dimensional in the best possible way. Sometimes that's what you're looking for in a character, and that's all you want, is just Kratos is going to be furious. And, he has had a little bit of depth to him in the previous installments. We have seen his family, we have seen what happened to his family, we have seen him kind of rage against his servitude, but in this, to see him as a fully fleshed out character, to understand the weight of his actions, to understand what it means to have a second chance at having a family, and to lose that again in a completely different way, and how he now has to raise a child by himself, which would have been so boring if he told me that was what it was going to be. He said, it's going to be about how difficult it is to raise a teenager. I'd have just been but actually, that's amazing. So, it's this story that was really unexpected to me, and just, I'm not a dad, but it truly touched me, and it's so beautifully written that I think everybody can pull something from it. It's absolutely stunning. And then, yeah, speaking of stunning, the world, it's so beautiful, and it's obviously, God of War's always looked cool because that's what it is. It's set, whenever you set something with gods and mythology, it's going to look dramatic and grand, but it's actually lots of the little touches in this that make it really beautiful. So yes, you climb mountains and you stare down over stunning views, but just little things in the houses you go into, or what their home looks like in this kind of humble space that he's built for himself, and it wouldn't be where you think he would live, but that's what his house looks like, and the little bed where his son sleeps, and so it's the love and the details that they've put into it to make it a very realistic world, because obviously it's mythology. It could just be this ridiculous, fantasy world, and parts of it absolutely embrace that element and are stunningly different, and just the colours and the flowers, and they are really otherworldly. But then the bits I love truly are just the really human bits, and what it looks like, and like I said, inside his house is something that I wouldn't have thought of. I didn't really think, where would Kratos live, but then suddenly it really humanises him, and it's just another element of the game that reminds you that they're fleshing this character out, they're turning him into a person, they're turning him into somebody who has motivations other than just pure rage. And I think, for me, it's just such a masterpiece. It's managed to do so many different things, from completely kind of reinventing combat and changing how that feels, to reinventing a character whilst letting me hit things in the face with a battle axe. I mean, what more could I ask for?
So my game of the generation so far is What Remains of Edith Finch, which is a game you can't really be funny about What Remains of Edith Finch.
Give it a try.
It's be hilarious. It's a very short game.
and I really like very short games because they're games I can definitely finish. I very rarely finish like big, long, 50 to 100 hour epic games anymore. I always get about 20 hours through and then the next one's come out, so I end up having to play it. But What Remains of Edith Finch I was able to finish in one evening. It takes about 2 or 3 hours to finish. And it's a very haunting, beautiful, relentlessly creative exploration of this family's history, and the family is sort of physically represented by this house that looks a bit like the Weasley house from Harry Potter. It's all sort of like built on top of each other, and each family member has a room within this house, and the rooms have all been locked away. And I don't really want to give too much of the story away for people who haven't played it yet, because it's available on Plus now, right now. And if you haven't played it, flipping it, go and get it on Plus because it's fantastic. But basically, you play as young Edith Finch, I think, and she goes back to this family, her family home, to basically explore and try and learn the truth behind her family, because, again, without wanting to go too much into it, there's various events that have happened to her family that are quite mysterious, and it's left quite ambiguous as to why these things have happened. But essentially, you're just walking through an empty house the entire time. But it's just filled with like the creativity of it. Whenever you go into a separate room and you go to find out what's happened to a different family member, the game sort of like switches genres in each room you go into, and each one is so memorable and so fresh. It doesn't repeat itself at any point. You're constantly doing something new, and it's a game that only lasts 2 or 3 hours, like I said, but it feels like you've played this really grand epic adventure, and by the time you're finished, you feel incredibly emotionally drained, you're out of breath. But it's a strange exploration of sort of family history and memories that you have as well. And when Edith Finch goes back there, the house is exactly as she left it all those years ago when she first left. And it's such a different. Why have I chosen this game? It's an awful game to it, but just play that. It's amazing. You'll be finished in 2 or 3 hours, and you will not regret it. It's an incredible experience. There's nothing else like it on PS4. There's one specific sequence that I think is honestly one of the most amazing sequences I've played in any video game. It deals with Edith's brother Lewis, and there's a whole. And again, what happens to him is terrible. But the thing it makes you, the way it presents this to you, almost sort of elevates the tragedy of what happens, but by making it joyful. And it's a strange. You sort of play through this character. I think he's called Lewis. You play through his interpretation, his viewpoint of these events that have happened to him, and he's sort of lost his mind. And the way he sees these events, he's living in this fantasy land, and it's an incredibly interesting way to view an incredibly tragic thing that happens. I've run out of words.
Do you know
to say,
what? The strangest thing, Rob, is that I've never, I really agree with you about this game. I've never sat here and just agreed with you for 6 minutes. I don't have much to say. It is really good, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it is difficult. It's difficult because you don't want to spoil it. And I agree, it's really, really good, and everyone should play it. But yeah. I have nothing else to say.
I haven't played it, and you've sold me on it. So I'm like, I want to play it.
I mean, even if you hate it, Rosie, it's done in 2 hours.
Just get the trophies.
Just play it, for goodness sake. I mean, yeah, it's free on PS Plus right now. Play What Remains of Edith Finch.
I absolutely despise any questions like, what's your game of the year? What's your game of this? What's your favourite game of all time? I hate these questions so much, and I'm just going to have to go with my heart on this one, because I've been debating what my favourite game of this generation is for around an hour now. And I'm going to go with a very early game in the PlayStation 4 life, which is Bloodborne.
Oh, nice.
There you go. Probably mixed responses for that, but I'm content.
I am surprised.
Bloodborne, I think, was just the first game that completely blew me away in this generation, and even today, it's still a game that if my friend says, oh, I'm thinking about playing Bloodborne, I'm like, play Bloodborne. Or if someone's like, oh, I've seen, can you play Bloodborne? I want to see it, but I'm like, yes, I will play Bloodborne. It's just a game.
With that voice, always in that voice.
Always in that voice. It's just a game that I can just constantly go back to, I think, over and over and over again. And I say that, and I still haven't done New Game Plus because I'm a bit scared to go back into New Game Plus after it's been so long since I've played it. But it's just, I think the game is gorgeous. I love the whole sort of gothic, Victorian-esque sort of area that it's in. I absolutely adore that. I remember when it was first announced, I remember like my brother was like, oh, this game looks a lot like Nightmare Creatures on the PS1, which we loved when we were kids. And I was like, this looks really cool. Oh, I can't wait. But then I was also a bit like, oh, I've never played Dark Souls. Is it a game I'm gonna like? But my God, it's such a good introduction to the whole Dark Souls, sort of the souls of games and stuff like that. And I remember even when I first started playing it, I wasn't gonna get past the Cleric Beast at first. I was one of those people who was like, I'm really stuck. I don't even want to carry on with this game anymore. It's just not the game for me. And as I've mentioned previously on the Tuesday checklist, like, I had my mum come in because she was a bit concerned. My brother was about to come round, and while he was on his way over to come and be like, okay, I'm gonna help you with this Cleric Beast because I don't understand what you're doing wrong. Like, I did it whilst he was on his way to my house, and I was there like sweating and shaking and like bright red. But it was such. I have never had.
This. Just sorry.
But I've never had a game.
We need to go over.
An intervention.
We need to make sure she's actually alive. But I've never had a game done that to me since, and it's just something that resonates with me. And then past the Cleric Beast moment, I just can't remember an experience that I've literally been like, I'm gonna come home and play Bloodborne all night. I'm gonna finish school, because I was at school at the time. I believe, yeah, I must have been at school. Or was I? I can't even remember how old I am anymore. And I was just like, I'm gonna play, basically, I just wanted to play Bloodborne non-stop. I was talking about it non-stop to my friends who didn't care, to my brother, who was an even bigger like fan of this game than I am. And it's the first game, I think, as well, that I've gone in depth into the lore with, because obviously with these games, they've got a big lore behind them. And I've watched like video essays on some of the characters and some of the small items you pick up, and never before have I been so invested in the tiny details that a potion bottle might have or something like that. But just I've never had that experience before, and I just can't recommend it enough for people. Even if you're never going to do like Dark Souls or Sekiro or anything like that, I just highly recommend Bloodborne because it's a great introduction to those kind of things. I think it's a really nice balance, and it's just the aesthetic, the music on it is amazing as well, and I listen to it on the motorway when I'm going to the airport.
That sounds dangerous.
That's gonna be.
The thing is, it makes everyone looks like really serious in other cars, and then you're there like with this opera music going like, it's the funniest thing ever, and I love it. But Bloodborne, a fantastic game, and one that I think is still resonating with me even after all these years in this generation.
Well, it could have been many games, couldn't it? It could have been, I was thinking, and Rosie was talking about Bloodborne, I was thinking about all the different amazing first-party games there's been this generation. I loved Horizon, didn't I? That was good. And I really liked, I nearly chose Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation was great, but I felt like any choice I made would have been a choice that was just to surprise people and to spite the fact that everyone already knows what I'm going to say, which is The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt.
There
which
he is.
I'll be very surprised if that doesn't end up being my game of the generation at the end of the generation. Why do I like The Witcher 3? You guys can tell me why I like The Witcher 3. I've explained it so many times. It was the first Witcher game that I played. So I was thrust into this world not really understanding what it was I was going to be doing, who Geralt was, what the state of play was in the world around him. And I found it bewildering at first. All the different factions, everyone seems to be fighting each other all the time. The game has a certain sense of kind of justice to it, which I didn't really have a grasp on. And Geralt was a character who's kind of quite cold, and he's not particularly likeable at the beginning. And I hope that I'm slightly too old for the kind of gruff, cool guy, oh, I love this guy, he's like a big tough man. Like, I'm kind of over that. And I thought that's who he was at the beginning. And it turns out maybe he is that, but there's so much more to him as well. And the things, and I guess what impressed me when I played The Witcher, gradually starting to understand the world. I still don't know it particularly well. There's like elements of the politics and stuff that I never really got into. There's like a man in one of the palaces who you go to him and he will explain who everyone is. That's how complicated that part of the game is. He's got like a big board with all the pieces on it. And when I started to understand that what they had done was quite realistically portray a world which is riven by war, and so is miserable for everyone who isn't fighting the war and therefore is kind of like fed and watered and has like cool armor. Like all the peasants are just like, you know, like they're being everyone's being downtrodden. There are like dead bodies in the fields, and that's why there are so many kind of horrible parasitic people, like creatures living off the dead bodies. Like
I love when you get quests. Sorry to interrupt,
No.
but like the traditional fetch quest in a game of this nature is, my sister's gone missing. You're like, okay, I'll go find her. There she is. I brought her back. Whereas in The Witcher, yeah, I found her. She's dead.
Yeah, exactly. or really early on, there was just like there's a dwarf early on you find who's a blacksmith. And there's a drunk guy in town who's been stealing his tools, and I found the drunk guy, and I was like, out of my 3 choices here, I'm going to do like the level-headed nice thing. I'm going to bring him back to the dwarf because that's the right thing to do, and then I'm going to give the dwarf the opportunity to forgive the man. And the dwarf instead called over the local soldiers, and they hung him immediately. And I was like, oh no! And I like that the game is like you can make your decisions and try and be the person you want, but this is like there's war everywhere. No one cares if like there's an extra drunk dead body on the
pile. And it makes you sort of harden yourself up, because I remember I was doing the same thing, and eventually I got to a point where, again, like in other RPGs, you do a quest and they would offer you money, and usually in RPGs you're like, no, I'll just do it because I'm nice. Whereas in The Witcher you're like, yeah, give me whatever you have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I felt like in a way I became, I don't want to say like in tune with the Witcher code, because then I'd have to go and live in the basement forever. I didn't want to though. But you get a sense of who Geralt is, and you kind of in all these games you're half role playing and you're half enjoying the character, and I kind of felt comfortable with elements of the depth of that character as kind of interpreted through the games but sat in the original books, and I felt like the world was like an incredible place to explore in terms of like the depth of experience, like a world I wanted to explore and a character that I was really happy to do it with. I've never come across anything like The Witcher 3 on this generation so far, but there's time.
Obviously, it's set in the realms of Yggdrasil, which is the the world tree.
I feel like you've gone full TED Talk with this.
I'm just going to do a quick 15-minute brief on Norse mythology. Is everyone good with that? Okay, settle in. So, Yggdrasil, the world tree.
Pay attention everyone, because there'll be questions afterwards and battle axes in the face for anyone who gets them wrong. Let us know your pick for Game of the Generation so far. For goodness sake, play What Remains of Edith Finch if you haven't yet, and click that notification bell to stay up to date with all our videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next week for another Tuesday checklist.
For the players.